So I've been wanting to record a separate thing on this YouTube channel for a while now. Last year and the year before, I tried to do a book club, but I didn't really keep up with it. Mostly because I'm really bad at keeping up with things that I do. I'll get super interested in doing something, and then I'll stop doing it for whatever reason. Either I don't get the amount of feedback that I'd like, or I just lose interest, or something comes up and it conflicts with the schedules or whatever. Um, and all that stuff that I was doing before, I kind of wanted to do it for other people, not necessarily just do it for myself. But um, since I've started my podcast again, I think this is the second or third time with my buddy Chad. I've been wanting to do something where I kind of keep a record of what I cared about that week, like every week or whatever. Um, kind of like not really for anyone else to really digest, but more so that I can keep, like I said, a record um, of what I cared about that week, week to week, what big news stories happened, or maybe even life stuff that happened that I cared about. And I guess I just wanted to do this. Just gonna be short. It's gonna be similar to the openings to the podcast going forward. We started doing this thing where we wanted to kind of like, talk to each other really quickly about what we cared about that week, whether it be political or in the news or just life in general. Mine have been a lot more political, and I kind of wanted to keep a reference of that separate from the podcast so I can talk a little bit more about it. And because with those, I try to be quick, since the point of our podcast isn't necessarily to talk about what I care about. It's more to talk about like make a conversation between the two of us, that we both care, like we both enjoy, or that we're both interested in, or whatever that we think you guys would be interested in listening to. But for this, it's more for me. It's more just because I've always had the idea in the back of my head that I wanted to either write down or in some way record what I cared about historically or whatever, because I'm a really big history person. Um, but so this is gonna be just I guess a recap of this past week um, for me, and just what I cared about. So I went to my first convention, and let me preface this too. I'm not talking about these things in any ranked order or anything. I have them all written down on my notebook, and they're in different. Um, it's more of like when it became important to me, or just when I wrote it down, and that's kind of how I'm going through it. So it's not like ranked based on importance. So I went to a convention in Ohio called Con on the Cob with my buddy Warren, and it's a gaming convention about like tabletop games and board games and stuff like that, not like a video game convention. It did have cosplaying and art and all that sort of stuff, which I guess is kind of um, general for conventions. I'm not sure. I've never really been to one before, so um, just from what I've seen, like through videos online, or just my conception of a a convention, that's what I thought would be there. So there's that. It was interesting to say the least. I was kind of the roadie for Warren when he was performing, as his like stage name, Alpha Riff, for the music that he does, which you guys should check out. I'm actually featured on a couple songs in his discography, and the plan is that I'm going to be involved on future things as well. So we'll see how that goes. But it was interesting. I got to meet some really interesting people. A couple of the other performers who I got pretty friendly with. Fred, whose stage name is Juice Lee. Talked to him a lot, and Justin Curry is another guy who performed. Talked to them a lot, and it was really fun. I had been spending the past couple months, trying to get over some depression and trying to get a job and just, feeling kind of down and out and all this sort of stuff. And, Warren, being the good friend that he is, he, asked me if I wanted to get out and go do that with him. So that was nice. I'm not sure if I'll go to Con on the Cob again. I realized when I was there that there's always this, idea that if I would ever go to a convention, I might fit in or whatever, that it'd be something that I would, that it would interest me, or that it would be the type of environment that I would click with, I guess. Like, I'm really bad at finding, I guess, like, social, even though I'm like a really extroverted person, it's really hard for me to find social environments that I really mesh with, that I feel that I can be myself with, or feel comfortable, or not be on guard or whatever. Like concerts, I'm pretty open. I don't really like going to clubs. That was never really my thing. I went to a couple when I was like right out of high school, and just other like social gatherings. It really depends on like on my mood for one, and just the I guess the general atmosphere of the place. Not to say that this was a bad one. It's just that I felt like an outsider, and I told Chad that I was more interested in just observing everything and not really interacting with anything, which kind of goes against my extroversion, I guess. But there is a part of me that is very inquisitive and just wants to view things before I can, make a decision on whether or not I want to interact with it or not. So there's that. Some big news things that have been going on recently. This week, Trump. Well, okay. So the big things, I guess I'll try and rank them or whatever. No, I'm not gonna. So the impeachment's still going on. Subpoenas are going left and right for people to either testify in front of the House or give up documents. So that's been happening. A couple associates for Rudy Giuliani, who are tied to, I think they are actually Ukrainian and who are tied to Ukraine, were arrested for campaign finance fraud. So that was interesting. This is adding another layer to the whole impeachment thing. But I won't go too deep into that. My thoughts on the impeachment is, I feel like I don't have a strong stance either way. Whether I think he should be impeached, or even the 25th Amendment should be put against him for being incompetent. But when it comes to impeachment, I think it's important to do that. But I think that the way that the Democratic Party is going about it is kind of, wishy-washy, especially when they're not really being forthright about Joe Biden, Hunter Biden's corruption, and all that stuff. So that's been kind of annoying. But that's neither here nor there. And so I was saying, Trump apparently he moved troops away from the northern Syrian border, which borders Turkey, and where our Kurdish forces are, who have been allies of the United States in the area fighting ISIS. We moved out, Turkey moved in, started bombing the area. As of this recording, apparently some of the strikes almost hit some American troops by mistake, so that's not good. And one of the biggest concerns, from the left and the right, and a lot of people that I talk to online and other places, is that we're abandoning our ally in the region, so that A, destroys our ability to keep allies around the world, because they'll, wonder about our, resolve, or, being able to, follow up on promises or whatever. And that by us moving out, the Turks are going to essentially ethnically cleanse the Kurds, who are an ethnic group in the Middle East, who are one of the highly persecuted groups in that region. And I don't know enough about that entire thing to really give my own concrete opinion. I've been keeping up with it a little bit, and I mentioned this in the podcast too, that I've heard the term Kurd before for a long time, but it's not something I ever really looked into. Being an American, one of the things that's bad about us, well, it's like a double-edged sword. Being so, I guess, insulated from the rest of the world by the two oceans that separate us, and just the distance. It makes it easy to feel like things going on the other side of the world don't really impact us or aren't really important. So when you're growing up in this country, when you hear about stuff happening over there, quote unquote over there, it's hard to really care or to learn enough to care or to see that as an actual issue worth caring about. But along on that side as well, another big international thing that's been going on for months is the Hong Kong protests, which I've kept an eye on a little bit longer, since that's been a longer issue. I guess in relation to like the us pulling out of Syria is relatively new compared to the Hong Kong protests. What I mean, not the obvious longevity of the political turmoil over in the Middle East. But so the Hong Kong protests, I went over that in the podcast, but I'm going to put it here too, that Hong Kong is protesting because an extradition bill sent from Beijing in China was saying that if any people in Hong Kong, Hong Kongers, if they broke any laws that are laws in China, but not necessarily laws in Hong Kong, that they can be extradited to China to be sentenced or tried or whatever for that crime. Because China is a very authoritarian country. Xi Jinping, their president, is very authoritarian. He, I think he was elected. I'm not really sure how that went down, but I know that he essentially made himself president for life. I remember hearing about that news a while ago. And they're very quick to silence dissenters. They have state-controlled media, state-controlled internet. They're very strong on dissent. And Hong Kong, being a more democratic entity of China, sees themselves as not really being a part of China. So one of the big thing is when this extradition bill came down, the Hong Kong people, feeling like they weren't being given their due rights as citizens of their, the one country, two systems shtick, that they weren't being listened to or given their fair shake. So they started protesting to have the bill removed. And then as the protests escalated, millions and millions of citizens in Hong Kong went on the streets. First it was like every day, and then they moved it to the weekends. I'm not sure if it's still just the weekends or not, but I know that they are still protesting as of right now. Like, it's still a sentiment that they hold. They're not done protesting. But after that first demand of the extradition bill being removed, they added 4 more demands of their government. And those are more related to the reaction of the government to the protests. So they went on the streets to protest this bill that would send them to China for criminal charges. And the backlash from the police and the government was very swift. The police have been shown to use excessive amounts of force and brutality against the protesters. Their government has even called them rioters, which is is an unlawful gathering where protests are lawful in their country, and a lot of people have been arrested for, quote unquote rioting while they're protesting, well, being called rioters while protesting. And aside from that, people have been killed, people have been injured. There's one video that's been going around of a protester being shot point blank in the chest by a cop. So that's just the kind of the world that they're living in right now. But the other four demands, along with the removal of the extradition bill, like I said, involve the reaction to the protesting. So they want a outside third-party investigation of the police for misconduct and brutality. They don't want it to be internally investigated because they think the corruption there will just make that go away. They want a recall of the government calling the protests riots, which switches the lens of it from being unlawful back to lawful, since protests are lawful. And they want the people who've been arrested for protesting to be released, to be freed and have all their charges dropped against them. And then they also want universal suffrage. I don't really know too much about that. I figured that all of Hong Kong was democratic, since they are, the very short history of Hong Kong is that it was a colony by Britain, back when the British Empire was still a thing, and Britain gave Hong Kong, their colony, back to China in the early 1900s, I believe. But since then, they've kind of been running two different systems of government, where Hong Kong has been more democratic and China has been more communist, authoritarian. And that's kind of gone back and forth for a while. So I don't really know. Again, I don't know too much about that. I want to know more, and hopefully over the next months I will learn more. But apparently their prime minister or president or their top leader isn't actually voted in, or she wasn't voted in. She was appointed by Beijing to run Hong Kong, which they don't like. They don't like the fact that their ruler is not someone that they chose. So that's another thing that's another one of their demands. And related to all that Hong Kong China stuff, which again, like I said earlier with the Syria thing, it seems like it's on the other side of the planet. Essentially it's on the other side of the ocean. It doesn't really affect, Joe Blow American, whatever. I mean, unless you think about it in terms of China being a superpower, China exerting its will, the Hong Kong people calling out to America for help by using the same words that we use in the revolution about liberty and freedom, that sort of stuff. And them asking for solidarity from us is very, is very pointed. But the day-to-day, the protests don't really affect Americans, so it's hard to get them involved. But recently, a couple of American corporations have come under fire from ostensibly kowtowing to China for silencing opinions that people in their organizations have had. So the NBA has been in the news because one of the general managers of one of their basketball teams, the Houston Rockets, I have it written down, Daryl Morey, their general manager, tweeted out a picture saying, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." And that's the link to China with that, aside from monetary links, is that the Houston Rockets is the team that Yao Ming played for, who is a Chinese national who came to America, a really tall Chinese guy. So that link to China makes the NBA you know, a lot of people in China really like basketball through Yao Ming, through all that sort of stuff, and through the NBA, trying like getting a foothold there with their brand. So the NBA, when this general manager put that out, he had to delete it, put out an apology for saying stand with Hong Kong, and there's a boycott going on in China for the Houston Rockets. Nike, in relation to this, they apparently took down all of their Rockets merch in China to kind of placate this, I guess. And there's just been this shutdown of free speech in relation to Hong Kong when it comes to the NBA. People have been shut down, not even like violently or vocally protesting at football games, but there was this one video that went out that was pretty popular of these four guys at a I don't even know the team. I wish I'd written that down. But they were at a football game, a basketball game, and I think they were saying in Washington, D.C. They were all wearing Free Hong Kong shirts, and they were holding up a sign that said Free Hong Kong. Security guard came over, told them to put it away. That we can't, pretty much saying that they can't affirm their political stance at the basketball game because it doesn't go along with the rules of the NBA game, which is bullshit. And then they said, like, one of the protesters said, is it because it doesn't fit the sign rule? Apparently you can't have a sign over a certain size in the audience, which makes sense. You don't want to block the view of someone else, but he said that at the very end, like, yeah, it goes against our sign rules, so that there was that as well. And then later on, those same guys, they were holding up a sign that said Google Uyghurs, which is an ethnic group in China that is Muslim. In Western China, that is being persecuted currently. They're being sent to re-education camps. And when I first heard that, like months and months ago, is that they were doing that because they were trying to fight Islamic terrorism, and so the Uyghurs are in not concentration camps. They are in re-education camps because the Chinese wanted to fight Islamic extremism, but their methods have obviously gone way beyond any sort of simple re-education. There's work camps and things like that. And apparently, I just found this out. I heard something recently about China essentially harvesting organs from people, which when I heard that came out, I was like, oh wow, this is recent. Apparently, it's been going on for at least 20 years. So that's horrifying. And in relation to the free speech in our country, these companies, these American companies, are, instead of letting people say something about China, they're so worried about losing a market share over there because they have so many people and so much money that they're silencing any political opinion on those things. And another thing that just came down was the company Blizzard. Is a video game company who made popular games, World of Warcraft, Hearthstone, which is related to WoW, StarCraft, Overwatch. Those are the biggest games that I can off the top of my head right now. They were in the news as well for a similar thing. There was a streamer, video game streamer, who won a competition, played a game, and during the post-game stream where he was being interviewed by some esports casters, essentially, he said in Chinese, because I believe he's from Hong Kong, he said, "Liberate Hong Kong, the revolution of our age." He said that in Chinese on the stream. And because he said that in the post-game, he was denied his winnings. It's $10,000. He was banned for a year from even playing Hearthstone, and the two people who were broadcasting and esports casting that interview, they were also fired for a year. I guess they were banned for a year. I heard that they were fired outright. And as soon as that came out to the general gaming public and the general public who care enough to even know that sort of news, the backlash was swift. People were extremely upset that Blizzard, a company that in one of their tenets says embrace, or every voice matters, is one of their company tenets, and they essentially shut down this guy because he said something political on one of their platforms or whatever. And it very much looked like they did it because he was critical of China, and one of the investors or stockholders of Blizzard is a Chinese company called Tencent. So, the backlash was swift. People were boycotting Blizzard. They were deleting their accounts. They were deleting their subscriptions, saying, how can you, as an American company, do this to someone just talking about, some a political thing in another country? You're only doing this for the money. You only care because China has a stake in your company, and you don't want to lose that cash that's coming from a large player base in China as well. You don't want to piss them off. And they came out with a statement, I think yesterday or the day before, kind of walking back their decision. They're apparently going to give the prize money back to the guy, and he's only going to be banned for 6 months instead of a year, which is still big because the video game, these pro video game players, that's their livelihood. Back in the early 2000s, when playing online or playing video games in competitions was more of you play in a competition and then you kind of go back to your normal job. The way things are now, Twitch streamers, other streamers, playing video games and being in competitions is their livelihood. And just because this guy had a pretty benign, his delivery was obviously was pretty radical. I guess he kind of screamed it, but being in favor of a pro-democracy revolution, I guess, in a country, when you're a democratic country and a company in a democratic country, seems very, very ridiculous. So, they walked it back a little bit, and they tried to give their reasons, saying, oh, we care about people's voices, but you can't use that platform to talk about your political views because they don't want. They pretty much said it was a slippery slope argument. It's if we let everyone talk about their political views on our platforms, then it's just going to evolve into this thing where that's the only thing that gets talked about, which I don't believe is true, because usually those platforms are just used to talk about the games. We always, recently with the whole football controversy and the kneeling, sports don't really get politicized that often. But they are large platforms if you want to get a political view out there to the wider world. And I don't think he should be penalized for voicing that opinion. And I don't think it's in Blizzard's best interest to try and silence that kind of decision, or make people were saying that they were making an example out of him, to say that if you ever slip up and do that again, you're going to be screwed. There's a team, I think it's a League of Legends team. I'm not sure. I don't really follow it, but there's a team that has Hong Kong in their name, and sportscasters, the esportscasters, couldn't even say their name. They had to say HKG instead of saying Hong Kong. They would start to say Hong, they go Hong, HK, and they'd have to change it because even saying Hong Kong is a hot button issue right now because of China, which is just ridiculous to me. Going off that, something that's been going on. Let me back up a little bit. So there's been the boycotting by the players, and there are also a couple walkouts by employees in their California office. I don't know if that's still going on. I haven't seen any of it followed up on, but I think that's big too. That the company shares the view of the player base, saying this is kind of fucky. You shouldn't have done this, and refusing to work until either they come out with a better statement or they change their stance. Another thing that I brought up was the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, going on strike from GM. That's been going on for over a month now. Roughly 50,000 workers are on strike, and they're looking for protection for their temporary employees, temporary coworkers, who have been temps way beyond the normal temp time. So usually I think it's like 90 days. That's usually how it is That's usually how it is at most businesses. There's like a grace period, and then you get hired on full time or you get released. But GM has kept these employees at temporary status for years. And the unionized workers who are full-time workers want protections for those temporary people, because the way they see it is that you can't benefit from their labor and not give them the due security that they deserve as being an employee, whether it be pay, whether it be health care, whether it be just job security in general, by not being able to fire them for any reason. So that's another big thing. And they're also protesting because of the striking, I should say, not protesting, striking, because of outsourcing. Lordstown, Ohio was a big thing in the news because that was, I think, a place that Trump went to in his initial run for president. And he talked about how the GM plant there wasn't going to leave, it was going to stay, and how he's going to bring jobs back from Mexico or back from China or back from the Philippines or wherever. And after that happened, the GM plant in Lordstown closed, and a bunch of people lost their job, and people are obviously pissed because of that. So they're striking because of those things. Things have been going back and forth between the UAW and GM management to try and get to a resolution. As of this recording, I haven't seen any resolution being passed. I haven't heard of one. So I'll keep my eye on that as well. And one of the last big things that I really care to bring up again is the Supreme Court rulings that are going out for LGBTQ discrimination cases. There's 3 cases on the Supreme Court right now. 2 are about people being fired for their sexual orientation, in this case for being gay, and 1 person being fired for their gender identity, this for them being transgender and being fired for being transgender from their job. And the Civil Rights Act, Workers Act in 1964, which stops employees from discriminating based on age, race, sex, religion, and a couple other things, is in flux right now. The Supreme Court is trying to decide whether or not gender identity and sexual orientation fall under the term sex. Obviously the plaintiffs are saying that it should, or even essentially they're saying they shouldn't be discriminated against because of those 2 things, which I would agree with. And the defendants, I think one of them was a religious company, or there was religion involved. So they're still waiting to hear back from that. Now, on a bit of a lighter side, I guess, I wanted to talk about a couple movies that have kind of resurfaced that I wanted to see. I saw Joker. Thought it was really good. I thought, aside from its, grotesqueness and just the mood of it, that I thought was played very well. I think it's critiques on society. This is kind of it's kind of a joke online. You say we live in a society is a bit of a meme, but the way that it's portrayed in that movie, I think, is very pointed to, in relation to kind of the world that we live in right now. I won't go too spoilery into it, but a couple big things that happen that kind of parallel the current world we live in is the main character, Arthur. He's obviously mentally ill, and he can only really go to the social worker for help, and it's really not working. He needs better mental health help, but he's not getting it, either because he can't afford it or because it's not available. And later on, this is kind of said in the trailer, so it's not really a spoiler, but the social worker says she can't see him anymore, and it's because funding for that program was cut, which just throws him into a spiral of, depression and other things. But that kind of makes me think about my own life. Not saying that I'm going to be like the Joker, but mental health is a really expensive thing. To see a therapist without health insurance is $150 a session, which, if you're mentally ill to the point that you can't even hold down a job, trying to get help is next to impossible. Some medications are really expensive, and in some places there is just no available healthcare professionals for mental health. I know, like almost 10 years ago, I tried to see a psychiatrist, and it was like 3 months I had to wait to see that person because they were so booked, because there aren't that many at the time. There weren't that many healthcare professionals who did that. And plus, you got to talk about like health insurance. If you do have it, who's in network and who's not. And then one of the big things when it comes to healthcare or mental health care and trying to find a therapist is you got to try to find the right one, because they're not all the same. You got to be able to click with the person, and it's this whole thing that it's not just, you go to your home doctor and get a shot and then you're fine. It's very involved, and they touch on that a little bit, and they also touch on the class disparity. One big part, like a couple of things like going on in the background that if you don't catch up on, you could miss. There's a worker strike going on, and the workers who are striking are the sanitation workers. Now, I've only seen it once, so I didn't catch why they're striking, but I assume it probably has to do with working conditions. Working conditions or pay or something like that. A reason why people strike, kind of like what I brought up with the UAW. And trash is piling up around the city. And that's causing a lot of tension with the lower classes. And they even said in one of the radio reports at the beginning of the movie, in the background, if you don't catch it, you don't catch it. They said that even the nice parts of the city are starting to look like shit because of the strike has been going on so long. But one of the class disparity things that comes up is that a really wealthy person, Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's dad, calls all of the poor people clowns, essentially saying it's their fault for being poor, which is kind of a talking point that some wealthy people in this country have. Like, if you're down and out or poor, that's your fault, and that the people at the higher rungs of society shouldn't have to take care of you. Now, whether or not you agree with that will be, based on your own value system or where you fall in society, I totally believe. But I think that the stark similarities between that fictional, 1981 and current today are pretty stark. And I just thought it was, that's the thing that I connect with most. The fact that this guy who seriously really needs help and who is like calling out for help too at a lot of different places, and just isn't getting it either because he can't afford it or because the system isn't, the programs aren't there. Which the social worker being cut from the program to help inner city people with their mental health, I doubt costs a lot of money to the taxpayer. I really think that being cut, I obviously can't know, but I've seen in our current political system that stuff like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid get put on the chopping block all the time when it comes to programs that need to deal with debt problems with the government. We have to get rid of those. When those things do the most for a lot of people, and when it comes to budgeting, they are like, a drop in the bucket that is the budget. So the fact that in this fictional story, those same, things that are underfunded in the first place, because you can tell by the woman's office, just the conditions that they're in, that it's not really a great place to be. That the next, it's either that or going to Arkham for mental health care, which is similar to something that I had to do. When I was 25, I had a panic attack at work, and I needed to see a therapist. But, the wait times were ridiculous then. So instead of, trying to tough it out and wait to see someone, I went to the hospital and was admitted to the psych ward for a day. And then the next day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I got to talk to a psychiatrist, and we figured some stuff out and talked about my medication, all this sort of stuff. But I literally had to be admitted to see a doctor. And I had to be around drug addicts, homeless people who had very serious mental health issues when I was just dealing with, my clinical depression. But that's the world that we live in, is, the capability of finding certain healthcare is next to impossible. And that's ridiculous. And I think that part of the movie I really connected to, because it really went along with, not went along with, but it really spoke to that, because those are the things that I've had to deal with in my own life. What else? So, this is, every week I usually record a new podcast episode with my buddy Chad. I think I said that at the beginning. But we only release them 2 times a month. And I'm curious if the people who watch or listen, because it's not a video in the traditional sense, it's just audio, but we put it on YouTube. I'm curious if the listeners would want us to release them more often. We try to release one once, or we try to record one once a week, so that we'll have a backlog. So far, we've recorded, I want to say, 7 podcasts already. But the way that we started doing them with the what have you been thinking about this week, I kind of want to release them more frequently, so that our thoughts on the current events kind of align more closely with the actual current event, because right now they don't. They won't. We recorded one at the beginning of October, last week's episode, but it probably won't be released until the end of November, or even the beginning of December, since they're so spaced out. So part of me wants to release them more frequently, just for posterity. But that's something we'll have to think about, and we'll probably put a thing out about that too. But yeah, those are all my notes from this past week. Things that I kept an eye on or cared about. I didn't mention Bernie Sanders' heart attack, not because I don't care, but just because it seems like it's a small thing in relation to these other things. He's fine. He's going to be back on the campaign trail. He's going to be at the debate next week, which I'm going to watch, and maybe I'm going to be tweeting the whole time. I know that for sure. But I don't know if I'll put out a video or not. Because I one of the main reasons why I wanted to get back in the podcast, and I wanted to do these, and to tweet, be on Twitter, is just to be more politically engaged. So I've always talked about how I feel like I'm not qualified enough to really voice my opinion on things, but I want to. I want to at least have a discussion. I want to talk myself through these things. It's one of the, if you listen to the first episode of our podcast about conversations, we kind of, me and Chad both kind of talk about how we like having conversations because we want to be able to talk out our own thoughts. And I think being able to do this, one-to-one, is a bit of an outlet. Obviously, I like to have conversations with other people. And hopefully soon we'll be able to host guests on our show. But that's still a couple months away. Maybe early next year we'll be able to, but that's obviously something we'll have to revisit. But yeah, this has just been my week update, I guess. Probably try to do one every Saturday if I have a chance. But yeah, it's been almost an hour long, damn. Hopefully they won't all be this long. But thanks for watching if you do, and if you don't, this is mostly just an archive for myself. Peace out.